You guys ready to go there? Amen. Appreciate you guys sitting toward the front today. Make me look like I'm not standing up here by myself. You're under the lights now, so I can see you. Amen. Well, we've been looking at the area of biblical counseling, introduction to biblical counseling. In the last class, we started lesson 14, where we talked about gathering information and clarifying statements, and we want to carry on from that particular lesson today in this session. When we were talking about gathering information, we were talking about different ways to gather information. One of them, of course, was using our little questionnaire that we put together on personal data inventory. But also, we talked about asking some direct questions. This is one of those settings where you can actually be pretty blunt, you can be pretty forthright. People are coming for advice and counsel, and actually, you go to a doctor sometime, they ask you such personal questions, but the whole purpose is to diagnose where you're at and help you. And so people come in with a frame of mind sometimes when they're talking to you with the ability for us to ask very specific questions. We also talked about observing body language, being observant to other things that are happening in the session itself, and then we gave you some keys on practice, how to ask good questions in that process. And then we talked about the importance of listening. It's one thing to ask questions, but you got to listen carefully when people are giving you the answer to those questions, because they're going to give you some clues as to what might be their root problems, what might be possible solutions, what might be some of the things that they may be doing that are hindering their growth and development. So listening is very important. We talked about how important it is to have concentration. When you listen, you've got to have focus, and that takes a certain amount of discipline. All of us have a tendency for our minds to wander. Yours might be wandering right now. You're wondering why you didn't have more to eat for breakfast. You're wondering this and wondering that. But the truth of the matter is we do have to focus, and I think sometimes most of us have lives that are somewhat cluttered, and so it's very, very easy while somebody's talking, especially if they're kind of going on and on, to sort of start thinking about something else and find yourself not even in the same room with them mentally and spiritually. And so that's why it's so important to be an active listener rather than a passive listener, and kind of try to keep yourself engaged in what is going on. And we said one of the ways to do that, of course, is to make positive remarks about what they're saying, but also take a few notes about what they're saying. It kind of keeps you focused. We talked about trying to maintain a good climate for people to be open and to minimize those things that might threaten them from being open. We should be on letter D on that lesson. Good listening involves good note-taking, and so that's where we want to kind of pick it up today. Does anybody have a page number for me? 34? 54. Okay, page 54, letter D on there. Good listening involves good note-taking. We want to talk a little bit about the note-taking process. Personally, I don't think when you're counseling anybody really about much of anything, unless it's just kind of a very, very simple in the gap kind of a 10-minute thing. But most of the time you're going to have pencil and paper in hand. It seems to me the older you get, the less you can remember from time to time. Also, the more people that you actually talk to over a period of time, it's easy sometimes to confuse who you heard what from whom and so forth. And I know some of you out there with perfect memories, like Paul out there, don't have this problem, but someday you might, Paul, when you get a little bit older. But the whole point is that note-taking will be very, very valuable for you. It will serve you in many ways. Number one, the purpose of note-taking, first of all, is to glean and record clues to root problems. So as people are sharing, as people are talking, you're jotting some things down. You don't want to stop them from talking. You don't want to stop them in the middle of a sentence, but you're jotting some things you've heard that you might want to come back to, because the way they said something, the phraseology that they used, and later on you might come back. Now, when you were sharing your testimony, you made this statement. I just want to know what you meant by that or something. And so you're going to be jotting some of those things down. They're little clues that you're jotting down along the way. And if you get enough clues to something, you can start figuring the thing out. Secondly, letter B there, to list out future agenda items. you might be starting to break down the problem even in your own mind, and you say, okay, well, we need to come back to this, we need to come back to that, and that, we need to spend some time talking about that. That's going to go on our list of agenda items the next time we meet. Maybe it won't be this time because there won't be enough time to get to it all. And the only way you're going to be able to remember things from session to session, I think, is by jotting down some notes to yourself, and the best way to do it is while it's happening. And then letter C, to do for us what even a good memory cannot do, and that a good memory isn't always reliable. And I do know this, that when I was much younger, it was much easier for me to remember things. I got to write more and more down all the time, and I think that's just normal. Some say your brain just fills up, and every time you learn something new, something old's got to go. And so it's very indiscriminating about what goes. And so it's just important to help ourselves. We help our good memory with a sharp pencil, amen. Number 2 there, the service your notes will provide. Your notes will provide a great service to you when you're in this process. First of all, they will help you remember to ask certain questions of clarification without having to stop the counselee in mid-conversation. What will happen if you interrupt too much during the counseling process, you're going to lose a sense of context to what's happening, and when you go back into what's being said, they'll lose their train of thought, and you might not get where you want to go. So you don't want to be interrupting any more than you possibly have to, although sometimes we'll talk about this a little bit later. You might have to interrupt for clarification purposes, but at least this will keep you from having to do that. Letter B, they will help you remember things that were said from session to session. And like I say, you're going to probably go over these things in your mind or just in your notes, actually, just before you start your next meeting with them, so you can kind of refresh your memory on some of the things that you remember from the last session, that are written down from the last session, so that as you start, you can start with kind of a refreshed mind in that way. And then letter C, they will help you keep a record of homework and homework results. You're going to be giving homework. Sometimes you'll give it to them in written form, but more often than not, you'll be telling them verbally what you want them to do, but you'll be writing it down in your notes and having them write it down in their notes, so that when they come back to you the next time, you can remind them of their homework and ask them how they've done, and then also record some of the results that you received from that homework, and you can keep that all together. And then letter D, they will help you to refresh your memory over long periods of time. Sometimes you will have worked with somebody in some particular area, and you haven't talked to them about that or about anything, much of anything, for now maybe a year or maybe 2 years. And then suddenly they come back to you, and they want to remind you of what you told them. And you can't always remember exactly what you told them. And sometimes they don't remember it just right either. If you have the notes, I know I've had people come back to me and say, do you remember when you said thus and thus, or when you told me to do thus and thus? I said, boy, I sure can't remember that. Let me check my notes. I can go back, maybe find my notes, and you can say, you know what, that's not what I have written down here. This is what I have written down that I gave you to do. This is the assignment I gave you. This is what I said. And it's pretty hard for them then to argue with you when you actually have a written record of what you actually told them. And so it can be very helpful that way in kind of adjusting hazy memories, because everybody's memory gets a little hazy. And you know, sometimes it's not malicious on their part to forget something or to remember it in a wrong way. I find that when you're talking, even in a setting like this, or when you're preaching, people are hearing in different ways. And what you said is not always what they heard. What they hear, they put in the context of everything else that's going on in their head at that moment in time. And sometimes, you know, I will be surprised, I will be shocked when I get into the gap maybe after a service and just discussing about what the preacher talked about. And you know, if they gave a title to the message, it wouldn't be, in my mind, remotely connected to what I was talking about. But they have a context, they have a setting in their frame of mind, and some of that's the Holy Spirit. But I want to be able to remember what I actually said to them, not what they perceived that I might have said to them. And sometimes people will come to me and they'll say, I said some pretty harsh things to them. Honestly, I don't try to do that. I actually try to be very... I might be firm, but I try to be gracious when I'm firm. And so sometimes they'll say I said something, and I just can't even picture myself saying that to any human being or even a dog. And yet they said I said that to them. Where did they come with this? But to them it was so forceful at the time, it's like they took it to 3 or 4 levels higher than what I actually said it, maybe because the Holy Spirit was jumping on them as well as I was jumping on them. Well, it will help you a little bit. Number 3, guidelines for successful note-taking. Letter A, these notes are for your eyes only. And that's really, really important. You should keep them, as we'll talk about here in a minute, but they're for your eyes only. This is not something that you share. Letter B, these notes should contain your own code words. Sometimes, you're a little reluctant to write down certain words in relationship to people, and that's okay. It's okay to develop little code words for yourself, and you know what it means, but maybe nobody else knows exactly what it means. Letter C, these notes should be kept in a safe place so that they're just not accessible to anybody who might just walk in your office or something and look on your desk by accident and see all these things that are written down there. And then these notes should be destroyed when they are no longer needed. There comes a point in time where they're really not necessary to keep any longer for the purpose of bringing healing and strength into a person's life, and I do believe that it's you don't want this long FBI file on everybody that you know in the church. No, at some point in time, okay, this issue's past, it's gone, it's over, and I think we're at a point now where we can get rid of that. I might also say this, and I don't know if I said it anywhere else. I think I might have said it earlier, but if I didn't, I'll say it now. And that is that it's always good to, when you first start out, to ask permission of people to take notes and help explain to them why you're doing it. It's for your benefit that I'm doing this, for all of our benefit that I'm doing this, but I hope you don't mind if I jot a few things down while you're talking. I don't want to be interrupting you. I don't want to be doing, and you kind of explain that to people a little bit, and I've never had anybody say, no, you can't write anything down. I don't want you to help me that way. No, it's just like your chart, when you go to the doctor. You don't mind if I write down a few things about you, or the dental office. I got to mark your teeth to find out which ones have holes in them, so forth. Okay, so note-taking is very important, I think, in the counseling process. Let's go on to Roman numeral 3 here, the importance of clarifying statements. One of the common practices of people who come to you for counseling is to use phrases, use words, use descriptive sentences that actually put them in a very good light compared to anybody else. Especially if you have maybe 2 people that are involved in an issue, maybe a husband and wife or something, you're talking to the husband or you're talking to the wife, and when they describe the situation, there's a tendency for them to use terminology or use words that maybe leave a better impression of themselves than they should, or maybe leave a worse impression of somebody else than they should. And so sometimes when you're talking to people, you need to, at times, clarify what they're saying. Letter A, there are common statements that have to be clarified. Number 1, these include exaggerations and sweeping generalities. Remember, you can't counsel in general. You have to counsel in specific. Life is not lived in the general realm. It's lived in the specific realm. It's not lived in the abstract. And so the more we can hone in on, get the language as pure as we can, the better we can understand the problem, and then the better we can also offer a solution to the problem. Counselors often use exaggerations to make their point, but in doing so, they don't always present the situation as it actually is. And again, if you don't know how the situation actually is, you can't really give a good diagnosis. There are certain words that characterize most exaggerations, including words like all, everybody, everything, always, never, anything, no one. And you pick these words up in conversation all the time, and you don't want to correct anybody all the time, although some people like to correct people all the time. But in the counseling process, it's a little bit more important to correct some of those things or catch some of those things. Here's some of the typical ways that somebody might say something in a counseling setting. My husband never helps me around the house. That word never. You mean in all your married life, he's never once done anything that helps around the house? Well, let's find out exactly what that means. She always puts me down in public. Always? Every time you're in public, she's putting you down? Everybody is against me. Well, I'm not against you, so that's one right there. Nobody truly cares. I've tried everything. to fix this. Everything you've tried, every single thing. There isn't one thing out there that you haven't tried. Well, what about this? Oh, no, I haven't tried that. See, there is one thing you haven't tried. My wife always puts me down no matter what I do. He never cleans his room. My parents never expressed love. Your parents never expressed love. So how did you come about? What do you mean they never expressed love? They didn't make out in public? What? What do they mean by that? What are they trying to say when they said they never expressed love? Obviously, they had to at some point in time, or they wouldn't even be married. What do you mean by they never expressed love? Well, what they might mean is I never saw them publicly show affection toward each other. That isn't the same thing as. And so, again, sometimes these statements come through, and again, they're trying to make a point, and they're trying to sometimes justify their own behavior or why they are the way they are, or whatever. Or they're trying to make another person look to be really terrible. But these words in letter B need to be challenged and clarified by the counselor. So one thing, we have exaggerations. And then number two, it includes common euphemisms. Now, we talk about euphemisms in many settings, but a euphemism is simply a more acceptable word that's used in place of a less acceptable word. And most of the time, when the Bible speaks of wrong behavior, it speaks of it in terms of sin or sinful behavior. Now, a lot of even translations of the Bible that are coming out now seem to be trying to take the sin words out of the Bible and kind of translate them into something that's a little bit more palatable to our society today, because in our speech today, people just don't like to use the word sin. I mean, you can probably count on one hand the number of times in a casual conversation with somebody that they've used actually the word sin. They'll use just about every other word but sin to talk about things. Now, usually when we think about euphemisms, we think of them in the context of people, avoiding swearing by using a better sounding word. The word euphemism literally means sounds better. It sounds better than something else. And a lot of times when we're dealing with people's problems, there are terms that are used that don't really help us too much, because unless we get it down to some more specific terminology, we're not going to really be able to find a solution to the problem. Here, let me give you some examples of this. Someone will say, well, I have emotional problems. Well, what does it mean to have emotional problems? I mean, you have emotions, yes. And are they not functioning the way they're designed to function? Oh, no, they're functioning exactly like they're designed to function. In other words, the fact that you are having some sort of a crisis and you feel bad and you feel that you're kind of emotional during a particular period of time does not mean you have an emotional problem. Actually, your emotions are working exactly the way they were designed. It's like, I got computer problems. You know what? Usually the problem is not the computer, it's more the user. I find that usually they function exactly like they're programmed to function, but you just hit a button that you didn't know what meant, and all of a sudden everything kind of did something. Now, if you knew what that button meant, and sometimes the same is true in relationship to our life. There's no problem with our emotions. The problem that they're actually working exactly like they're designed to work. And if we're feeling some certain things right now in our emotional makeup, maybe there's some root things that are causing that feeling that we're having. But sometimes we have to kind of think about those words. And we have the word alcoholism, which is very common, of course, and we've talked about this one before. But when you go to the Bible never uses the word alcoholism, but it does refer to the situation that we often refer to as alcoholism, except it uses the word drunkenness. And, of course, when was the last time you ever heard in society today somebody use the word drunkenness when referring to people who have a problem with alcohol? No, it's always alcoholism. But you know what? As long as you label it a medical condition, then you're going to look for a medical solution. And God has another solution for that. And there's going to be some need for not just some pill that you take from a medical doctor, but there's going to have to be some behavior modification that takes place, because we're dealing with a sinful behavior. And unless you deal with sinful behavior with the root of repentance, then whatever you do after that is not going to be very successful. We also use the term behavioral problem. He has a behavioral problem. You mean he's rebellious? You mean he lies? You mean, well, actually, yeah. and you get down to some of the root things, yes, it is manifesting itself in certain types of behavior, but what is the root of that? Or eating disorders. I mean, these are just examples. I mean, we could put other things down here, but there's no disorder in people's eating. I'm telling you, they don't have a drinking problem. Bring the glass up to their head and they can't quite hit their mouth. No, that's not the issue. The issue has to do with behavior. You think of things like bulimia, anorexia. I'm a recovering anorexic, by the way, and I have come out of that very, very well. But but the issue is, I don't want to make too light of these things. I know there are serious issues in people's lives, but I'm telling you that putting your finger down your mouth or binging and then purging or taking laxatives so that your body doesn't retain certain nutrients and so forth is not a medical disorder. But by labeling it bulimia and anorexia, she has anorexia. She has bulimia. No, I find that when you go across the world today, you find things like anorexia and bulimia get real small in terms of proportion of the population when you go into poverty-stricken areas that don't have fashion TV. These things become very, very high in societies where the ideal of a feminine figure is very thin and almost gaunt, and people think that they are always too fat. You go to other cultures that don't think that way, you don't find. So if it's a medical condition, if it's a genetic disorder, why don't we see that in other places? Well, it's not. And oftentimes we're treating it more like that than we are like the fact that it should go into a different department of our life. It's not an eating disorder in that sense. So it's important for us to deal with some of these things which I call euphemisms because they make things sound better or sound more acceptable than if we would use other kind of language. Number 3, this includes all non-specific terminology, all non-specific terminology. There are many words in the counselee that they'll use to describe their condition that are very, very general. And if we're going to find, again, specific solutions, we've got to help them with this. Some examples might be, the counseling suggests something like this. My husband doesn't love me. My husband doesn't love me. Well, what does that mean? So a wife's complaining about her husband. My husband doesn't love me anymore. Well, okay, that could mean a million things. Maybe not a million. That might be an exaggeration. Could be a euphemism. I don't know. But for the sake of a point, there could be lots of things. Love in this context can mean, well, what do you mean by that? So sometimes, rather than just going right to it and say, well, you really need to love her more. What are we talking about here? Well, when you start to analyze that a little bit, and there's some questions that can help you. For instance, you would ask maybe something like, in what way does your husband communicate to you the idea that he doesn't love you? The husband might say, well, sure, I love her. Well, we got, she loves me not. She loves me, she loves me not. He loves me not. So we got her word, he doesn't love me anymore. I do love you. And if you don't quit talking that way, I'm going to hit you. No. No, I do love you. Well, you're dealing with a general concept, and he's right and she's right. Okay. So you got to say, okay, she has the perception that you don't love her. Okay, now you ask the lady, what is it that he does or says or that gives you the impression? We know he loves you, but what does he do that gives you the impression that he doesn't love you? I'm telling you, when you ask a question like that, get ready for the answer, because it will not be usually what you expect. You may get an answer like, well, he works late hours at the office and I don't get to see him very much during the weekdays. If he really loved me, he'd make it more of a priority to be home for dinner. Or, oh, well, okay. We're dealing with a little different issue now than he doesn't love me. Okay. And there maybe needs to be some lifestyle changes. There may need a whole new discussion here now. Okay, what are we really talking about here? Or the counselee may suggest, letter B there, my husband is inconsiderate. Well, what does inconsiderate actually mean? That is his basic human nature. He is inconsiderate. Everybody comes up with the same evaluation. He is inconsiderate. He is never considerate at any time because he is inconsiderate. Just like God is love, he is inconsiderate. Well, you're dealing with a character quality that sometimes manifests itself in certain ways, but then if you're really going to deal with the issue, because she's got some things in her mind that have brought her to this conclusion to make the statement that he is inconsiderate. So you can ask, in what way does your husband demonstrate to you that he is inconsiderate? Well, again, get ready for the answers. She might say, well, my husband always wants to watch sports on TV, and I'd like to watch other things like the cooking channel. Well, okay, he's inconsiderate. Maybe the solution is buy 2 TVs. I don't know. But it's a lot different than maybe what you were thinking when she first said that. Or he leaves his dirty clothes on the floor. He's inconsiderate. If he was really thinking about me and the rest of the family, he wouldn't do that. He doesn't replace the cap on the toothpaste, He's inconsiderate. Why doesn't he put that cap back on and put it back where it belongs? It's always on the counter there. The cap's right next to it, and there's usually a little ring right there of toothpaste sitting on the counter where the cap was. Just bugs me to no end. Can't he be more considerate? Or he cuts off other drivers when he drives. He doesn't give tips in restaurants. He doesn't use deodorant on his day off. I don't know what it is. But you got to get down to what is she specifically referring to. Maybe he is inconsiderate in every aspect of life, and everything I listed and more he does. But usually it's 1 or 2 little nitpicky things. Lesson I did in a family series was 1,001 irritations and how to deal with them. I mean, a marriage can sometimes be 1,001 irritations. They aren't anything big in themselves, and if you come to counseling over a toothpaste cap, it just doesn't seem like appropriate stuff to be talking about with the pastor. Let's talk about toothpaste. So we got inconsiderate instead, so this is where you get down to irreconcilable differences. Well, he likes to use, he likes his coffee one way, I like mine another way, he likes this one, and so forth. And of course, sometimes it just is learning how to live with each other with knowledge. But these are some of the things that have to be clarified. Letter B, there are common excuses that have to be challenged. Excuses like, I don't have the time, or I can't do it, or I don't have the energy, or I've done my best, I've tried it, it didn't work. It'll never work. Sometimes when you talk to people, you ask them to do something, I can't do that. What do you mean, you can't do that or you won't do that? I never ask people to do things they can't do. And the Bible says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. But more often than not, it's not, I can't do it. It's more, I won't do it. Or, I don't have the time. No, what they're really saying, we all have the same amount of time. It's that I haven't decided that this is high enough priority in my life yet to adjust my time in such a way to accommodate this. That's what I'm really saying. Well, let's make this a bigger priority. It does mean we're going to have to shift some other things. I don't have time to read the Bible 5 minutes a day. My life is just so busy. Okay, let's go through your schedule and let's take a look at it and see if we can't find 5 minutes. Let's see if we can't find 10 minutes. I don't have the energy. Well, it's amazing what people have energy for. Have you noticed that? I mean, I cannot keep up with my wife shopping, honestly. But yet, her tendency is to be tired a lot. I mean, she goes to bed like 2 hours before I do and stays in bed an hour longer. So I'm thinking, and then when she hits the mall, man, I get so tired so fast. I get tired faster than if I'm doing anything else, really, when I got to go to a mall and shop around. But it's amazing what you have energy for. You have energy for the things, again, that are important to you. And it's amazing how that works in our psyche, if you will. I've done my best. Have you really done your best? I've tried. It didn't work. It didn't work. One of the things that you see a lot of times is people like to put things out there. It's like, it didn't work. What it like it has some sort of power in and of itself to, it is a being out there. It didn't work. No, you didn't work. It will work if you do it. And so oftentimes it's something out there. It's some kind of a force out there that's acting upon us. It will never work. No, wait a minute. You don't know that. In J. Adams' Christian Counseling Manual, he gives some of these types of statements that people will make, remarks, and then he gives some of these responses. I didn't really think I could improve much on these, so I thought I would include these here for you in your notes. Dealing with issues like I can't, and I've done everything I could. I've tried it, but it didn't work. I did my best. No one believes me. No one believes me. And like he says here, can you think of one person who does believe you? How about some more? I believe you. I could never do that. Never's a long time. If I had the time, I'd do it. Well, you do have the time. We all have 24 hours, so forth. Don't blame me. I'm not responsible. Don't ask me. I guess so. You know how it is. But I've prayed about it. I'm at the end of my rope. Which end? Yeah, the beginning end or the noose end? I have a need to. I'm just one of those people who has to. That's just the way I am. That's impossible. There are all sorts of objections to doing. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. That's a good one. Perhaps it's true, but you're not a dog. I don't think. You were created in the image and the likeness of the living God. He knows you and commands you to change. It'll never work. I'll never forgive him. That's a good one. I'll never forgive him. If you're a child of God, as you claim, you will. You are going to live with him for eternity. Why don't you forgive him and begin to get used to it now? I don't do anything halfway, so are you sure? Can you think of some of the things that you do that are halfway? Everyone is against me. How do you feel about it? So forth. He goes on and gives some great comments there that will help us to kind of clarify what people are saying. All right, the last point here, there are common questions that will help bring clarification to counselees' statements. And here are some of the questions. There's 4 of them that are listed here. Number 1, how or in what way? That's the kind of question we were looking at when we talked about the love. My husband doesn't love me. My husband is inconsiderate. Well, how? Or how is he inconsiderate? Or in what way does he not love you? Or you do not perceive that he loves you? This question will help the counselor to understand the way in which a particular problem is manifest, and it should lead to a specific activity that is objectionable. So my wife might have the perception that I don't love her. Well, why? Well, he used to buy me flowers, but he doesn't buy me flowers anymore. Or he used to remember my birthdays, but he doesn't remember my birthdays anymore. He never remembers my anniversary. He doesn't do this. He doesn't do that. He doesn't do the other thing. And so now at least you have almost something for the guy to work on. You know, sometimes, again, we think some of those things are actually rather small in some ways, but to one person they might be rather large. And sometimes it's just a matter of small modification of behavior in a person to get the problem sorted out. It's just a matter of perception at times. And in these kind of cases, sometimes you can give people, like for instance, I have this list that I got from one book, 105 ways to show love to your wife or spouse. And okay, there's some ideas for you. Here, give that to the man, say, okay, here's some things that you can do that will put a little more spontaneity in your relationship. But at least you've got some kind of a thing here that's helping you to understand. Here's another question that you can ask for the purpose of clarification. What for or why? This question will help the counselor to determine the motive or the intention of the person who was acting in a certain way. Again, it's kind of interesting because there's a tendency in all of us to presume the worst. And that is somebody does something, and that something can be interpreted in a lot of different ways, but our tendency is to interpret it in a negative way as it relates to us. And so sometimes it's good to understand, well, why did you do that? And so, for instance, oftentimes, what is interpreted as negative, actually the why it was done was very, very positive. For instance, it's like the little child that I used as an example before, because I saw this happen one time, where the little child went over to the neighbor's house, And this child was like 3 years old, just very young, barely walking. And suddenly went over to the neighbor's lawn, saw all these beautiful flowers, and they know Mommy likes beautiful flowers. And so they pick all these beautiful flowers and they bring it to Mommy. Mommy, Mommy, I have something for you. And she recognizes those flowers immediately, that they're from the neighbor's garden. And so rather than saying to her daughter, oh, thank you for thinking about me, next time, though, don't pick flowers over there. Stay in our garden and pick the flowers here. Or these are the flowers you can pick, all these little yellow ones that are growing in the middle of our lawn. That would be perfect. I just love those. But too often we would react to that and we would say, what have you done? What have you done? Oh, no. And so actually the behavior was very, very positive toward, the intention was very, very positive toward, but it was interpreted as a very bad thing instead of a very good thing, and now it's not going to be rewarded in a proper way. Now, the girl shouldn't be over there in the garden, but Mom should understand this girl's 3 years old, and this was an effort to please. It was an effort to show love. It was an effort to make Mommy smile, and now Mommy can take the flowers, put them in water, tell her about the flowers she really prefers, the ones from her own garden there, and she can go to the neighbor and talk to her on the side. And the same thing can happen. Somebody tries to, maybe the husband's going to give his wife breakfast in bed on her birthday. Well, you know what? That can end up being a disaster. The intention might be good, but by the time he gets there, he trips and dumps it all over her. Well, rather than react to the situation, actually the motive for that thing was actually positive. And so trying to get to the intention, like, why did you do that? And when you hear the explanation, how they arrived at making the decision to do what they did, you realize even though it was probably not the best thing to do, at least the heart was right and the intention was right, and sometimes the thing can be resolved right there. Okay, well, now I understand. A lot of times people come in to a situation like this because there's been very bad communication. And actually you're helping them to talk to each other, helping them to communicate what probably should have been said without your help, but oftentimes you're teaching people how to communicate with each other. Then a third question is, how often? This question will help the counselor to determine the frequency of the problem and whether or not this is a pattern of behavior or an isolated incident. I mean, if it's just an isolated incident, it isn't the same as if this has happened for the last 20 years and it happens every week or every month or whatever. That's obviously an ingrained behavior, and it's a lot more serious than somebody who just does something one time. Also, sometimes if it's a pattern of behavior, it could be the result of not having communicated properly or some other thing that's going on there that needs to be explored, but at least it will help you to understand the problem a little bit better. And then the fourth question that you can ask here is when. This question will help the counselor to determine whether or not there is a time when the activity in question is more likely to occur. It will help you understand the context of the event or the statement. And the thought here is simply this, is that sometimes people are more prone to do certain things than another time. It's like people who have lost a loved one. Oftentimes, for instance, on the celebration of the anniversary of that person's death, they will kind of go through a mini grief period again, like they went through maybe the first time when they lost that person. Well, when you start to understand, okay, what is the frequency? Well, my wife's like this every 28 days. I can't figure it out. Well, the frequency is going to help you a little bit. But also, when does this occur? When is it most likely to occur? Well, this seems to happen more when we go out such and such a place, or we do this, or we do that. When we go to the mall, my husband is so impatient. Well, don't take him. It's like some men have patience to sit there out in front of the fitting room and just kind of look very passive and interested. Other men do not. Learn to sleep with your eyes open, men, and you can get comfortable anywhere. But what I'm saying is there a place? And sometimes it's a matter of regulating some of those events in our life, and sometimes it will give us a clue as to why that is an uncomfortable place for somebody, or why that might be happening more often than not in that place. So the whole point here we're trying to make today is as we're gathering information, yes, we're asking questions. Yes, we're taking notes, very, very important, listening carefully, but also at the same time, as people are sharing their problems, we want to try to help them to speak as in specific terms as possible, which means we have to deal with some of these generalities. It means we have to deal with some of these euphemisms. It means that we have to clarify some of the statements that they are actually making, because it will, again, help us to get to a better solution. So these are some of the things that I think will help us, and next class we will go on from here and talk about the whole issue of instilling hope. Let's go ahead and take our break now, and we'll come back to this in a little bit.